Welcome to everyone, and thank you to everyone. Thank you to the Bronfman family, to the jurors, to all of you for coming out. I think, in particular, the people organizing this prize deserve an enormous amount of credit. These things take time, energy, effort, and money, but it's so wonderful to see it being used in a good cause. I'm an immigrant, and I had my own welcome community. It was a two-person committee called the Rose family, Dan and Joanna Rose, who I think are here tonight. And I think my successful integration into America, perhaps too successful for some of my detractors, is largely due to them. And it's only in New York can a Muslim kid from India be adopted by two Jewish New Yorkers, but that's how it was, and I'm deeply grateful for it. I thought what we would do is talk a little bit about really the heart of what you do, David, because I think your work, as I see it, proceeds from the assumption that we're not going to demonize half the country. We're not going to say that everybody who disagrees with you or who votes a certain way or who voices certain opinions in polling are bigots and wrong-minded. You approach it from the point of view that people have fears and that your job is to provide information, examples, and a certain amount of love and empathy to assuage those fears. And I think it's important to think of it that way, not just because it's the most effective way, but it also happens to have an element of truth. I mean, it's important to remember for most of human history, we were born, we grew up, lived, and died within 1 mile of where we were born. And that is the vast majority of human history. And then in the last 40 or 50 years, about 750 million people have moved from the country of their birth to a foreign land, often thousands of miles away, often a different culture, different religion, different skin color. And that does cause unease, that causes unsettlement. So if you look at in Europe, I think that in 1970, the number of foreign-born people in Europe as a percentage was about 2% of the population. It's now, on average, 15% of the population. In America, you go from about 4.5% to 14.5%. So these are real changes. There are issues involved. And one of the things I love about your work is that you understand that. You are not just providing empathy for the immigrant and the refugee, but also for the host community. So tell me, when you have worked in the United States, what is your observation about, what is it that triggers these fears? What is it that makes people worry? Because sometimes you hear people say, oh, this is all just imaginary, because the communities that have immigrants, like New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco, they're fine. It's those people in Michigan, Pennsylvania, who actually have never seen an immigrant. They're the ones who are worried.
Thanks, Fareed. And thank you for being here. I wanted to say I really appreciate it. So first I want to say you had talked about us not kind of writing off half of the country. If I were to write off people who had fears about immigration, who voted a certain way for candidates who might not be so pro-immigrant, I wouldn't be able to talk to most of my in-laws, right, Shannon? Just a shout out to my wife. Who my wife grew up on a dairy farm in western New York State, in the most conservative county of New York State. And I've spent a lot of time in Clymer, New York, and met a lot of really, really great people in Clymer, New York. And those are not people who are bad, but they didn't vote for the candidate I voted for in the last election, and they have fear of demographic change. And so those experiences have given me more empathy for people experiencing fear about change. And so that's a personal. On the professional level, the experience that I had in Nashville and in Tennessee, seeing those communities of certainly Memphis and Nashville get a lot of, or see a pretty big backlash. It's really about the rate of change. It's not just about change. So you can see in California going from a lot to a whole lot. and that might not make a big difference because people have already had that experience, and there's also an infrastructure in place to help on the integration front. But we started work in Tennessee, and then it wasn't a coincidence that we get contacted by a place in Nebraska next, and then maybe a place in North Carolina next. These are the places. In the past 30 years, we've seen the second great wave of immigration in our country's history. It's been a huge wave of immigration that's been kind of under the radar, but they've not gone to New York and California as much. New York State, yes, but New York City or Los Angeles, yes, but the real number changes have been in the Southeast and in the Midwest. And these are places that are seeing really, really rapid rates of change. Academics have pointed this out too, the rate of change. If you go from 10 to 500, it's going to make a much bigger impact on you and on your community than if you go from 10,000 to 12,000, or more like from 500,000 to 600,000. So yeah, we deal with places that primarily in places that don't have as much infrastructure and as much experience, because there you really got to start from scratch.
What do you think are the things that trigger these fears more than anything else? Because you've had in the last 30 years kind of all of the above. You've had people of different skin color. You've had people with different ethnicity speaking a different language. And what seems to me to be the most difficult for people is the religious issue. That if somebody is worshiping different gods, it seems, and this is of course something the Jews can empathize with and understand historically, though not in the present day.
So I was lucky in that before starting Welcoming America, after starting Welcome Tennessee, I spent a year studying at the Kennedy School at Harvard and did some a good amount of research on this. And a lot of the research shows that the fear is really based on this idea of symbolic threats. So there's kind of actual threats or realistic threats, and am I going to is this a security issue, or am I going to really lose my job? But the research shows when they get underneath that, they really get underneath that, it's about values. And are my values going to be challenged? And am I going to be irrelevant in my own community? That's the symbolic threat. And so whether it's a Muslim immigrant coming to Tennessee, or an undocumented Latino immigrant coming to a meatpacking plant in Iowa, people in those communities are fearful that their way of life is going to be changed and that their values are no longer going to be relevant, or even maybe their language is no longer going to be relevant. And so these are not necessarily rational fears, but they're fears that need to be addressed. And when Kassar spoke so eloquently about the value of contact, which is such an important part of our work, is how do you scale contact between longtime residents and newcomers. But that contact, it's amazing to see the light come on in people's eyes when they actually see, oh, well, that person does share my values, and I hope their kids do well in school. And so it just makes a huge difference. It's not all of what we do to change the perceptions, but the contact's an important piece.
It's so interesting you say that it's about people's sense of their own. It's, in a sense, it's about, ultimately, we're all a little bit self-centered, right? You're thinking about, what does this mean for me, my worldview, my position in life? I remember thinking back on Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation, which is written in a completely different light. But if you go back and look at it, what you notice is that every one of the people, I think I'm right in saying this, every one of the people who he profiles, these returning World War II veterans, are non-college educated white men who live outside of a big city, in a town in America. And the whole story is about how these people were the lions of their communities. They had come back and they were the heads of the Rotary Club or Kiwani Club, or they were, they had good, solid jobs, they were respected. And you think about how that world, for that person, their status is now completely different. They're looking at a world of, women working and immigrants surging, and they're probably thinking to themselves, wait a minute, I had a certain status in this community, and that's disappearing.
Yeah, that's right. And if you look at elections from the United States to Eastern Europe to all over the world, that's a big underlying factor in what's going on. People are afraid what they had is slipping away from them.
In general, you seem to find in the United States, and I know the Brexit vote is very similar, younger people have many fewer of these concerns. Is that your experience?
Definitely, yes. And contact has a big reason for that. If you look at schools in North Carolina, in Tennessee, and these other places that didn't have a lot of diversity but now do, the schools are extremely diverse, and these are kids who are growing up with a much more accustomed to diversity than their parents were, than their grandparents were. So I do have faith for the next generation. You see a lot more tolerance, a lot more openness to welcoming, but there's a lot of them are still kids. It's not going to happen automatically, and what's the damage in the meantime? That's the question. Yeah.
Give us a sense of what exactly you do. How do you work the magic? What do you do to make a community that's suspicious and hostile somehow become welcoming?
Sure, and I want to point out that I don't do it. Kassar does it, and Mara does it, and so many people who are here and elsewhere in the welcoming movement are the ones that do this work. I'm just I did it back in the day, and now I need to champion it. But I just want to point out all the work that so many are doing. And so there's two stages to being welcoming. You go from sort of some communities are fearful, and we need to take them to being more tolerant. And some communities are tolerant, we're trying to take them to actively welcoming. And so if you take the example of Nashville, which Kassar talked about, in 2006 it was a fearful community. So we had to use three approaches that we still use today. Leadership, local leadership, which is identifying people from that community, from all the different sectors that want to change the climate, that want to be part of a welcoming committee. And you mobilize them to change the messages and also to build a contact machine, basically. So next in Nashville after the leadership was the contact, fanning out, training people in the welcoming committee and in the broader community to fan out, to have dialogues between, there's so many amazing people in the immigrant and refugee community who want to talk to their neighbors but don't have a vehicle to do that. You create that vehicle. And then communications. In so many communities, the messages about immigrants and refugees are just so incredibly bad and wrong. And so in Nashville, we had 50 billboards that we put up across the city and the region. For pretty cheap, I should say, in Nashville, way back then. But the messaging matters, the contact really matters, the leadership matters, and it takes time. So it took years in Nashville to do what we did, and it took, there were, by the end, hundreds of people in the welcoming committee, and groups forming from that group. Like we had a group of over 200 pastors that came together as a result of this that were advancing things. So it takes a movement, and you have to build a movement in every community if you want to change the climate. But that's not the end. The going from tolerant to actively welcoming, if you've taken a community like Anchorage or Atlanta, where I live right now. With Anchorage or Atlanta, it's okay, if this is a welcoming community, how do we bring everybody back together? Or if this is a tolerant community, how do we bring everybody back together? In Atlanta, it's the Coca-Colas and the immigrant refugee community and the city of Atlanta, Mayor Kasim Reed at the time, to identify all of the different barriers that are keeping immigrants and everybody from fully becoming part of that community and succeeding, and then one by one reducing those institutional, those policy barriers. So it's a two-step process.
You talked about people have these stereotypes and they have these images and they have these ideas, and often they're just wrong. What do you do about that? I ask because this is now an issue I think of broader significance today. So you have the President of the United States talking about this massive border crisis, right? In point of fact, border apprehensions are at their lowest point since 1972. Net Mexican migration into the United States for the last 5 years has been zero. So you have a reality out there, but you have this image being fanned by a certain... What I worry about is people, the facts are very weak in comparison to emotion. If something emotionally resonates with you, you can correct people on the facts 10 times. It's not going to make a difference. So I think it was one of the Fox newscasts at one point said, "This feels right to me," referring to a fact. So you don't have to check it anymore. If it feels right, it's right.
So we use this analogy of the seed in the soil for the cultural part of our work. If you think of a refugee or an immigrant as a seed being put into a garden, traditional immigrant integration folks would focus on the seed, language classes, job training, the typical work that's extremely important. But you also have to focus on the soil, is what we argued. And so, our work is around, okay, how do we focus on the soil, but not just one patch of soil. The vision is immigration is an emotional issue, and it's hard to beat these emotional arguments when you're fighting somewhat, not fighting, when you're dealing with a lot of messages on the national level that are inaccurate and wrong. But when Nashville hears these messages now, because there's that infrastructure in place, the soil is fertile, and there's a group of leaders throughout the community who are constantly getting positive messages out there and ready to write the op-eds and ready to continue the contact. The message from the national level, it falls into the, but the soil is like, no, we're not. And so how do you, and then Nashville succeeds, so then, and economically, I should say, by doing this, and then, because they can attract corporations that want to be in a place where their employees from around the world feel welcome, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons. But then Atlanta wants to do it, and then Charlotte wants to do it, and it spreads. And so you're spreading this infrastructure that both advances welcome, but it also protects against this, frankly, demagoguery. And so the vision is that it'll be a bottom-up movement. We've gone from one community in the United States to 200, in a little over 200. Really, 2009 we had one, 2018 we have over 200. And so the idea is, how do we scale to every community so that these communities are both integrating immigrants but also protected from the modern world? And this isn't something the United States just needs. The whole world needs protection from political entrepreneurs who see this fear and throw a match in there. Because if we talk about the fear as kindling, dry kindling, if there's all this fear, one political entrepreneur throws the match. But what we're trying to do is pour the water on the kindling. But if societies around the world don't figure out how to do that and really invest in that, it's not going to work. Because the whole system is really, especially with an aging Europe and an aging industrialized world, it's not going away. This isn't going away. You need to figure out how to make it work.
So you've decided to try to make yourself a guinea pig and understand what it really is like to be an immigrant or a refugee. I'm assuming this is not one of those reactions to Trump winning, where you're leaving the country, but...
No, I'm not an American refugee.
But you are moving to Germany. Why? Explain what you're doing.
So Germany is, I believe, in the industrialized world, one of, if not the epicenter of the global welcoming movement. I say in the industrialized world because you can't, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, these are places that are taking many more than Germany. But Germany really is a model of a country that's saying, we want to make this work, we want to figure out how to make this work, but it's not easy. And so I personally am drawn to that as a Jewish American. I'm drawn to this idea of being able to help a country that had such a challenging and a past that had such an impact on my ancestors, but that want to be a model for something good. I want to help them to do that. And I want to help them be models for other countries in Europe, just like Tennessee or Nashville is a model for Charlotte and Atlanta. It's going to spread, I believe, through Europe. And we're doing this work now in Australia, so it's spread to New Zealand. We're doing it in Germany, it's spreading to the UK. It's going to spread everywhere, but it needs to be supported. And I want to be, and Shannon, thank you for taking our kids. And we're all going together. And Shannon's family is just like another personal connection. Her mom was, her grandmom is German, born to a German mom and a U.S. soldier. And so she still has a lot of relatives in Germany. And I've become someone who has maybe had my own perceptions of Germans way back when, to someone who's become really amazed with what they're trying to do there right now. And how much more welcoming they've been than, frankly, the United States has. And I want to help them do that. And I also want to connect the work happening in places like Germany to the work that's happening here in the United States. The forces that are trying to make the world put up the walls and pull down or pull up the drawbridges, are very, very organized on the international level and are connecting with one another and are, it's not like the Brexit people in the, people in the U.S. weren't talking and communicating. So I want to help build bridges between the global welcoming movement, because this is not a local issue. This is not a national issue. This is an international issue that needs to be dealt with through an international effort.
And it will probably provide you with an enormous number of lessons and examples, because I mean, Germany has taken in about 1 million people in the last year. It's worth contrasting that, alas, with the United States. And the United States, I think, has taken in last year 44 Syrian refugees, and Germany has taken in 1 million. And by the way, the untold story is that Germany took in 1 million refugees, essentially entirely unvetted, and they have had basically no problems. I mean, there's been a few incidents here and there, but when you consider the scale of what they did, the speed with which they did it, the fact that they had no time for vetting, and the fact that believe me, you would hear about a great deal of, terrorism and crime in Germany if it were happening by these refugees they took in. And the truth is, it's been remarkable. And as I say, the United States is not. So I think your point that Germany, bizarrely, has become the kind of moral leader of the Western world in a way that one couldn't have imagined, but will also provide lots of practical examples, because they'll do things that won't work and will, but they'll have lots of examples.
Yeah, and Germany has, it's not, I don't want to over-romanticize it, the far right is growing quickly in Germany because of the growth of this huge growth in the refugee population. And so they have been very interested in learning about particularly our work around the soil and how do you engage longtime residents and communities all across Germany. And so 3 years ago, the German government and several German foundations sponsored a project that we helped lead called the Welcoming Communities Transatlantic Exchange. And actually, there's 29 Germans coming to Anchorage, Alaska in a couple of weeks, or is it less than? Friday, as part of this exchange that we've been doing for several years. And yes, there's a lot of learning that our communities in the United States are taking from everything that Germany's trying. One of my friends called Germany the Silicon Valley of immigration right now. But also the Germans are learning from us as well, because we have done more around this receiving communities cultural piece that they just are realizing with the growth of AFD and Pegida and then the like. They need our help too. And that's what I'm talking about. That's why we need to be connected with each other, to support each other. And it's exciting to watch it happen. And I wish I could be there for the visit of the 29 Germans, but Mara's coming to visit with a lot of other US folks, cities coming in November to visit us in Germany. So I'll get to hear how it went.
It makes one recognize that if you want to look in the world for signs of moral progress, or signs that cultures can change, that nothing is written, that we all are capable of that. There is probably no better example than Germany, which, as you say, is not a perfect society in many ways and is deeply flawed in many. But if you think of the moral trajectory that Germany has traveled in the last 75 years, it's very difficult to see another place which has done that. And I think it's a great testament to you as a Jewish American to be kind of looking at that and affirming it. And I think it's a wonderful sign of the way in which the world is able to heal even the deepest wound. So we have to close this, because I was told very strictly by Jill Indig, who's running this program, you have 20 minutes and no more, and we are now at 20 minutes. David Lubell, such a pleasure and honor.
Thank you so much. Thanks.